I moved to Pinecliff Shores to retire in peace, not to declare war. After 30 years in state administration, my dream was simple. A modest lakefront home, early mornings with my fishing rod, and lazy afternoons cleaning my old boat, the Sea Reaper. She wasn't flashy, 22 feet of sun-faded fiberglass, but she was mine, a symbol of calm after decades of chaos. Then I met Douglas Kane. Douglas wasn't just the HOA president. He was the HOA judge, jury, and executioner. Square jaw, perfect hair, buttoned polos in every shade of smug. He had the confidence of a man who had never been challenged, and the ego of someone who desperately needed to be. He greeted me on move-in day with a laminated packet of community standards and a disapproving glance at my boat. "You'll want to store that off-site," he said, tapping the trailer hitch like it was diseased. "Driveway storage violates aesthetic harmony." I frowned. "It's registered. I park it neatly. And this is private property." He smiled, tight-lipped. "Not with an HOA. We share responsibility for keeping Pinecliff Shores beautiful." That was the beginning. At first, I played along. I trimmed the hedges to HOA specs, painted the fence eggshell beige instead of ivory, even replaced the mailbox because the post was too rustic. But when Douglas issued my first violation notice for storing a boat on my own driveway, I pushed back. I printed the bylaws, highlighted every line. Nowhere did it prohibit watercraft on driveways, especially when shielded and licensed. I knocked on his door with the evidence. He opened it like I was a solicitor. "This isn't valid," I said, showing the documents. "You can't fine me over a rule that doesn't exist." He didn't even read it. "I added Section 12B last week. No boats visible from the street. You can't amend bylaws unilaterally." "I can if the board votes." And they did. "Who's on the board?" He grinned. "My wife, my cousin, and Mrs. Braithwaite. She's asleep by 6. Doesn't ask questions." I stared at him, stunned. "You're running this like a dictatorship." He leaned against the door frame. "You can always move." That was the moment I knew who I was dealing with. Douglas Kane was a small man with a big title and a hunger for control. And while some neighbors complied out of fear or fatigue, I had no intention of backing down. The fines escalated. $50 became $150, then $300. He placed lien threats in my mailbox, unsigned, unsealed, but delivered with eerie precision. I installed security cameras. He had my trash inspected for violations. I caught him photographing my backyard through a gap in the fence. I started documenting everything. The final straw came 3 weeks after my formal appeal to the HOA board, a process he delayed at every turn. I returned home one evening to find a bright orange citation nailed to my door. Final notice. Property in violation. Legal action pending. But I didn't flinch. That night, I sat on the back porch, sipping coffee, watching the lake shimmer under moonlight. The Sea Reaper rested in her usual spot, quiet and loyal. I ran my hand across her railing. "You're not going anywhere," I whispered. At 2:17 a.m., a crack shattered the stillness. I jolted awake to a popping sound, then the whoosh of flames. Bolted outside barefoot. The night was lit orange, glowing with horror. The Sea Reaper was on fire, engulfed in a frenzy of flames so intense, the air shimmered. The heat slapped me in the face. Neighbors shouted. Someone called 911. I stood frozen, watching her burn, my memories melting into ash. The fire crew arrived in minutes, but it was too late. They doused the last of the embers. As the sun began to rise, one of the firemen crouched beside me, grim-faced. "Accelerants used," he said. Intentional fire. Arson. I didn't say anything. My fists clenched. My mind raced. The boat was gone. But the message was clear. Douglas wanted me out, and he was done playing by the rules. But here's what he didn't know. While he was running an HOA on power trips and forged votes, I'd spent my life writing the laws he now broke, and I knew exactly how to burn his little empire to the ground, legally. The sun rose over a charred hull, and an unshakable sense of resolve. I spent the morning cataloguing every inch of the wreckage. The fiberglass hull of the Sea Reaper had collapsed inward, blistered and blackened. The trailer's tires were melted. Puddles on my driveway, a faint smell of gasoline still hung in the air, unmistakable even through the mask I wore. The fire marshal arrived just after 8. His name was Darius, mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone. He circled the wreck with his clipboard, crouching occasionally to take photos or collect samples. Arson, no doubt, he said. Accelerant used. Burn pattern started at the stern. Very deliberate. Anything you can tie to a suspect? I asked. Darius hesitated. We'll run analysis, but unless there's video, it'll be hard to pin. I glanced toward the ice front of my house. There is. He raised an eyebrow. I led him inside and queued up my security footage. Midnight silence. Then movement. A figure crept down the sidewalk, glancing around like a raccoon at a garbage bin. He wore a hoodie, but the porch light caught a glimpse of his face. Square jaw, familiar gait. It was Douglas. He knelt by the boat's stern. A glint of metal. A red gas can. Darius whistled low. You've got yourself a smoking gun. Yeah, I said, voice tight. And I'm not just going after him. I'm going after everything he's built. The fire may have burned my boat, but it had ignited something else entirely. Retirement was over. Over the next week, I prepared like I was back in the governor's legal office. Every evening, after the day's scorched earth cleanup, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled the HOA's entire administrative record from the county clerk's database. Pinecliff Shores HOA had been chartered in 1993. Its articles of incorporation were riddled with outdated clauses and sloppy amendments. But one thing stood out, an obscure clause requiring biennial open elections for board positions, with public records of all votes cast. There hadn't been an election since 2014. The board, Douglas claimed, had authorized fines, penalties, and surprise amendments. Legally invalid. He wasn't a president. He was a squatter in power. Even better, I discovered the HOA's non-profit registration had expired 2 years ago, meaning it lacked legal standing to levy fines or hold property liens. Armed with this, I filed 3 official complaints. One, with the state's Department of Consumer Affairs, another with the Attorney General's Public Integrity Unit, and the third, a formal cease and desist to the Pinecliff Shores HOA, delivered by certified mail. The next morning, Douglas came knocking, not politely. He pounded on my door like a man trying to break it down. I opened it calmly, coffee in hand. You've crossed a line, he snapped, thrusting a red folder into my chest. You've sent legal threats. To me? To the board, I sipped. I didn't send threats. I sent facts. And you don't have a legal board. His face reddened. You think you can dismantle everything we've built? You haven't built anything, I said coolly. You've run a private dictatorship with expired credentials and zero accountability. And now the state knows it. He leaned in, eyes wild. You don't understand who you're dealing with. Oh, I do, I replied. But you don't understand who I used to work for. I shut the door. That night, I watched from the porch as Douglas met with 3 men in his driveway. One of them was his cousin, a board member. They spoke in hushed tones, gesturing toward my house, looking nervous. The tides had turned. A day later, an envelope appeared on my doorstep. Unsigned, printed in a rush. It read, "All fines rescinded. All liens dissolved. Board agrees to emergency re-election pending member approval." I smiled. It was too late. The next morning, I received confirmation from the state. The HOA's registration had officially been flagged as non-compliant. All enforcement actions, null and void. The Attorney General's office had opened an investigation. The HOA's assets were frozen. Douglas Kane was now the president of nothing. But I wasn't done. Not yet. There was still a debt to settle. Not with papers, with principle. He burned my boat, my memories, my peace. Now I was going to do something he couldn't undo. 2 weeks after the fire, Pinecliff Shores was no longer quiet. Whispers had turned to outrage. Word had spread about the expired registration, the illegal fines, the state's investigation. For the first time in years, the residents looked up from their manicured lawns and started asking questions. I hadn't meant to become a crusader, but once the veil was lifted, the damage was undeniable. Trash pickup fees, inflated. Landscaping contracts, awarded to Douglas's cousin's company, with no bidding. Security patrols, just a neighbor named Jeff, in a golf cart with a flashlight and an attitude. It was all unraveling, and fast. Douglas tried to maintain control. He sent out mass emails full of deflection and blame, claimed the state's investigation was a routine audit, called the fire a tragic accident, despite the video evidence. But nobody was buying it anymore. And then came the notice. Emergency HOA meeting, Saturday, 6 p.m., Community Hall. It was Douglas's last-ditch effort to spin the narrative. But I had other plans. I made copies, documents, emails, bylaws, fire, reports, even a freeze frame of Douglas lighting the boat. I put them in folders, 50 of them, one for every homeowner. When I walked into the community hall, it was standing room only. Normally, you'd be lucky to get 5 people at an HOA meeting. That night, 57 showed up. Douglas stood at the front, flanked by his loyal board, his wife, his cousin, and a very confused Mrs. Braithwaite. He wore a suit and a tight smile, but the sweat on his temples betrayed him. "Thank you for coming," he began. "There's been a lot of misinformation." I stood up. "I moved to dissolve the current HOA board, effective immediately." The room went silent. Douglas blinked. "You can't." "Yes, I can," I said. "Per Section 8 of the Articles of Incorporation, if the board has been found in violation of state law, and if more than 51% of members vote for dissolution, the board is terminated pending re-election." I held up a petition. 37 signatures. Gasps. A few nods. Then someone clapped. Douglas's face turned a shade redder. "This is a setup," he snapped. "None of this is legal. Neither is running an HOA without state registration," I replied, "or levying liens without a functioning board, or arson, for that matter." I handed out the folders. One by one, neighbors flipped through the evidence. Fines, contracts, fire reports, the photo of Douglas with the gas can. By the time Mrs. Braithwaite reached the picture, she actually gasped. Douglas tried to salvage it. "This is all circumstantial." "It's on video," I said. Silence. Then a voice from the back. Mr. Paxton, retired Air Force, spoke up. "I vote yes. Dissolve the board." One by one, hands went up. A wave of them. In less than a minute, Douglas Kane was no longer HOA president. He looked out over the crowd. No allies, no power. Just 49 angry neighbors, a mountain of evidence, and the unmistakable smell of justice closing in. "You'll regret this," he muttered as he stormed out. I doubted that. I stayed after the meeting, helped count the votes, helped organize the interim committee, helped plan the re-elections. By the time I walked back home, the sky had dimmed to orange. I stopped by the driveway, where the charred remains of the Sea Reaper had finally been cleared away. The scars were still there, blackened asphalt, ghost marks where the wheels once sat. But the war was turning. Douglas had started it with fire. I had answered with law. And now there was only one thing left to do. Make sure he paid for what he did. Not just to me, but to everyone he intimidated, silenced, and squeezed dry. Because if there was one thing he had underestimated more than my boat, it was my memory. Douglas didn't go quietly. In the weeks after the vote, he tried everything: lawyers, intimidation, even a community rally that no one showed up to except his cousin and 2 folding chairs. He filed a frivolous defamation suit against me, hoping to stall or scare me into silence. But he didn't realize something crucial. My background wasn't just in government, it was in governance. I'd sat across from lobbyists. I'd drafted enforcement bills. I'd once untangled a $12 million embezzlement scandal without blinking. A man like Douglas, puffed up on borrowed power and backyard authority, was just noise to me, and now I had real momentum. The interim board, newly formed and community-led, officially terminated all standing fines and began refunding the most outrageous penalties. One elderly couple had been charged $300 a month for leaving their trash bins visible for more than 28 minutes after pickup. We reimbursed every cent. We also put the Sea Reaper to rest, ceremonially at least. At the next meeting, the community gave me a hand-carved nameplate as a tribute. For the one who sank the tyrant, it now sits on my mantle. But there was still the matter of justice. Real justice. The fire marshal's report had been forwarded to the county DA's office, combined with my video evidence and the mounting civil complaints from other residents. They opened a formal criminal case. 3 months later, Douglas was arrested for arson, insurance fraud, and misuse of HOA funds. The charges stuck. He stood in front of a judge, hands cuffed, trying to explain why he poured gasoline on a neighbor's property in the dead of night. His lawyer tried to claim a lapse in judgment. The prosecutor called it what it was: calculated retaliation. He got 4 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and a permanent bar from serving on any HOA board in the state of California. His cousin, meanwhile, quietly sold his landscaping company and moved out of town. The great Kane dynasty had crumbled. On a warm Sunday morning, not long after, I walked down to the marina with a familiar ache in my chest. My slip sat empty, but my hands itched for a wheel, my eyes for open water. I hadn't planned on replacing the boat. But as I stood there, watching the waves lap against the dock, a voice spoke beside me. "You looking for something new?" It was Marta, a local boat mechanic I'd known in passing. She gestured to a sleek white and blue vessel moored nearby. One of my clients had to move back east, left this behind, paid off, said to sell it to someone who'd love her. The name gleamed on the side, Second Wind. I bought it that afternoon. Pinecliff Shores is different now. Our HOA has regular elections, transparent budgets, volunteers, not tyrants. Neighbors gather at the rec center, not for grievance hearings, but for potlucks and cleanup drives. And every time a newcomer moves in, they're handed a simple binder. Know your rights. I still take second wind out twice a week. Sometimes with neighbors, sometimes alone, always with gratitude. And Douglas, he's been quiet. Last I heard, he's living in a condo across town with no HOA. I doubt his new neighbors have any idea who he used to be, or who he tried to be. Good, because this story, in the end, wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoration, of peace, of trust, of community, and about one truth I'd almost forgotten until it was too late. Bullies only rule when the brave stay silent. Well, not anymore. He lit a fire thinking it would scare me. He didn't realize it would light my way.